Hi guys, my name is Mr. Clancy. I am going to be filling in this evening for Tom Ritchie, who is currently in Turkey. So today we were going to be going over Thatcherism. We've kind of changed it up a little bit. We're going to be going over European integration and more along those lines. We'll talk somewhat about Thatcher. And then I'll open it up to questions about essays or any kind of content you guys have. Follow Fiveable on all of its social media, Think Fiveable, and Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can go back and watch any of these recorded live casts. So we're going to be going over what some people would call transnationalism. It's from Key Concept 4.4, period 4. So we're almost to the end of all content. So really, to understand transnationalism, we kind of have to understand what nationalism is to begin with. So to understand nationalism, you have to understand that it's an identity based off of a nation, not just a feeling. So we're American, we're British, we're French. That can turn into nationalism to the point of where you are believing that you are better than others. And oftentimes nationalism along those lines leads to some pretty rough conflict. Transnationalism is not the exact opposite, but it's more of a belief that we as a community are integrated. And since we're integrated, we need to be able to work together. And the more connectivity that we have, the better it is. And so working along those lines, that's where we look at with European integration, is how transnationalism is going to be used. So to understand the groundwork and understand why Europe was looking at integration, we've got to look at some of the history beforehand. So if we look at the political history, well, Europe had just come out of the two great wars. World War II had allowed for the rise of fascism and the dictators of Europe. World War I had created a new concept called the nation state. This idea that you have a country created for one specific people, which led to that rise in nationalism. And then most Europeans, especially in the West, were not a big fan of communism. So politically speaking, integration would have allowed them to kind of prevent that within their countries. The wars themselves had a massive destructive effect on Europe. When we look at Europe after World War I, England got lucky. While they were not destroyed physically, the loss of so many men hurt their economy. If we look at France, Germany, the Western Front, especially Belgium, not only did they lose so many men, but they also lost a lot of farmland and a lot of industry land. After World War II, we see not only this destruction of mankind, but also the countries, including the economies. That's post-depression economic development. They kind of had two choices here. Are we going to work together, or are we going to go it alone? And pre-World War II, they did the whole let's go it alone. So they're going to try to work together. And it's kind of a way to see how they divide themselves in East versus West. Western nations more along the lines of let's bring capitalism back, while the Eastern nations were trying to figure out what form of communism they had. When we look at globalization as a whole, Britain and France especially had a lot to lose. They had a large empire. Britain, obviously, every continent almost in the world. But Britain and France were on their way down. The US was on its rise, and Russia had just begun its rise. So integration was kind of a way to be able to prevent this tug of war that the US and the USSR had put them in, as well as propping up their empires. All of this is in the understanding of the Cold War, right? So the Cold War, US, Russia, who's going to win, capitalism or communism? And integration really wasn't looking at so much as let's pick a side as it is let's not get steamrolled by either of them. Sorry, computer froze. There we go. So to understand why the integration happened the way it did, we've got two competing plans. On the right, you see the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is this idea that the United States is going to help any nation in Europe or in the world, and mostly in Europe though, that is recovering from World War II with two caveats. One, you have to have capitalism. The United States was trying to prevent the spread of communism. And two, you have to have pro-democratic elections and policies. If you have those, we'll give you money. On the other side, you've got Russia, and Russia has got what's known as the Molotov cocktail. And so this is my cat, Roku, who has decided he's going to say hi. So say hi, Roku, and then I'm going to put him away. So sorry about that. The Molotov Plan was really not a counterweight to the Marshall Plan so much as it was a we're not the Marshall Plan. It wasn't we're going to give you money. It's not we're going to help you out. It was more of capitalism is bad. Capitalism led to World War II. So if you follow the US, you're going to go into another world war. They weren't equal in identity and ideology, but for Western Europe especially, they had to pick this side of which were we going to go with. And many of the Western European nations, excluding Spain, were going to be going with this idea of let's follow the US's capitalist plan. So initial integration is not something that was easy. Okay, it's not even something that was new, actually. European integration was an idea from the 1800s. We think about the concert of Europe after Napoleon. That is a sort of quasi-European integration. Fast forward, end of World War I, a lot of European nations began this rumbling of if we integrate, maybe we can prevent the war again. But in reality, that's not how politics works, right? If we look at Great Britain, they gave a speech in 1947 with Winston Churchill saying that there should be a United States of Europe, but Britain's not going to join it. So the first laid groundwork is the Council of Europe. It's founded in 1949. It's founded by 16 countries. And ironically enough, there was actually a precursor to this unification called Benelux, which is a combination of 3 countries, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And that was kind of the idea that they were going to follow, is that we can unite for the prosperity of our countries, as well as to prevent the rise of dictators. After the Great Depression, there was a total collapse of global trade. And that collapse of global trade is why a lot of historians and economists say the Great Depression lasted as long as it did. It's also why a lot of people felt that that's what gave Hitler his power. It's because people were so desperate to find what we can do. So from there, we kind of see integration take off. You see on your screens, you got a lot of organizations. You don't need to know them all for the test because they all will not show up. But the idea here is for you to see, if you follow the GIF, that integration was possible. It wasn't easy, and some countries do it better than others. We have some like Benelux or Greece or Germany or France, and say hi to Roku again. Why don't we just put him right here? So this is Roku. He's going to be our mascot for tonight. So integration was really an idea that took off once European nations decided we can do this. And they started with small things. Standardization of weights, nuclear standardization, the defense agency, and it grew from there. Eventually, this idea of that United States of Europe kind of took hold, but it wasn't easy and it didn't have its like straight road. There were quite a few bumps along the way. So if we look at 2 of those bumps, probably the most famous of them are the Northern Ireland conflict and the fall of the Yugoslav republics, both of which tore Ireland and the Balkans apart and were very destructive to this idea of a united Europe. So Ireland had this time frame which is known as the Troubles. Roughly the 1960s until 1998. That is a very big generalization, right? Ireland's had its problems since the English landed there 500 years ago. But we're looking at how Ireland got to where it was after the Republic of Ireland was created. So Ireland, predominantly Catholic nation, over 80% of the island is Catholic. But when the Free Irish State was created, there was a vote, and Protestants voted overwhelmingly to stay part of the United Kingdom, while Catholics voted, nope, we want to leave. So from 1922 till 1937, Ireland had what was known as an association with the United Kingdom. Then in 1937, the Republic of Ireland was born. And that's where we start to see the devolution into conflict. Because what happened was the southern counties of Ireland not only broke from the King of England, they also broke from any kind of union with Northern Ireland. We see a small shift here of Protestants from the south moving to the north, Catholics from the north moving to the south, but overall there wasn't a massive population shift. What really was the problem was that in Northern Ireland, Catholics were excluded from most aspects of life. Okay, think about it in terms of the United States. We did the same thing. We excluded different religious groups. We excluded Catholics. We excluded Jews. Not to the extent that they did there, thank God, but we had our own issues, right? Ireland took it to a whole new degree because in Northern Ireland, Catholics were not just excluded from civic life, oftentimes they were persecuted because of their faith. And so around 1966, we see this kind of explode. You have union groups that are Protestant, you have Republican groups that are Catholic, you have paramilitary groups, you have the British military. They're all fighting for control of this small territory. Over 3,000 people were killed or injured in this conflict from the 1960s to about 1998. And so finally, President Clinton, as well as the Catholic and Protestant leaders of Northern Ireland, signed what is known as the Good Friday Accords. These accords created a power-sharing government in Northern Ireland, so split between Catholics and Protestants. The Yugoslav wars were much more detrimental and much more disastrous to this idea of a unified Europe. Because we have that resurgence of nationalism, right? We're losing transnationalism, we're losing this idea that humanity is one, and we're going back to what some would call tribalism, okay? So to understand why the Yugoslav wars happened, though, we have to look at post-World War II Yugoslavia. Initially, it was a kingdom that had a king and they had a vote. Do we want to continue having our king or do we want to go to a new system? Well, they voted to go to a new system. They just didn't pick that system. So along comes a guy, his name is Marshal Tito, who is a communist, and he takes over. Now, unlike Russian communism, Marshal Tito had no problems working with capitalist states. He was a phenomenal puppeteer and played the United States and Russia against each other all the time. He was actually part and a founding member of what was known as the non-aligned movement. These are nations that were neither communist nor capitalist. They'll go to either side for whatever they can get. Under his rule, there was no nationalism. You were not Slovenian, you were not Croatian, you were not Christian, you were not Muslim, you were Yugoslavian, and that's it. It wasn't until his death that this had to be dealt with, and they didn't deal with it very well. Almost immediately we see this division starting. I'm Slovenian, I'm Croatian, I am Bosnian Muslim, I am a Bosnian Serb, and that leads to finally in 1991, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and of the USSR, that Slovenia breaks away. Now, Slovenia breaking away, relatively peaceful, but that was the only one. From there, it devolves into total chaos. And Europe sees its worst massacre since World War II in the Bosnian city of Srebrenica. 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were massacred by Serbian militias. And so from there, that idea of transnationalism, a lot of people thought was dead. Thankfully, though, Europe kind of got itself back on track. After 1998, we do have a small blip. We have the Kosovo Wars, where ethnic Albanians try to break away from Serbia. And they're not completely recognized by all European nations yet. They're not part of the European Union fully. They are still administered by the United Nations. But overall, we do have a new resurgence in European integration. And that is with the Eurozone, the world's largest economic bloc. It has the most amount of money, and it's got the most amount of the ability to sell, other than China, obviously. The euro was introduced in 1998. It was a virtual currency then, it wasn't yet a real currency. But very quickly, 2002, 12 out of the 15 European Union countries there introduced the euros as their actual currency. And from there, we continue in European integration. And it kind of takes off from here because a lot of European members were deciding that this one economic zone was a good way to protect their economies. But again, that doesn't mean things are going to be easy, right? Closer ties are developed. If you look at this picture right here, you can see that we've got all the heads of the European Union nations with one very, very big exception. Let's see, let's take a poll and see if you know who's missing, all right? France is not missing. It won't let me add it. So just right on there on the right, tell me who you think is missing. Switzerland? Nope, it's not Switzerland. Switzerland actually is there, even though they are not part of the European Union. England or the UK? Yes, they are the ones who are missing. In fact, it's Prime Minister Theresa May who is missing. And that's a big thing because Britain has Europe's second largest economy after Germany, right? And so them not being there, that kind of calls into question this whole idea of integration and transnationalism. Is it going to work? Is it going to happen? So there are some challenges that the EU faced today, including the financial crisis of 2008. Some of you may have been taught in AP Human an acronym called PIGS. Not the nicest acronym for Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Germany, and Spain. They are the weakest economies of the European Union. And that all came to a head, especially in Greece after the 2008 financial crisis. The European Central Bank had no choice. They had to either allow the Greek economy to fail or prop it up with billions of euros. As of right now, they're still propping it up, but it's still in a very big, iffy situation of if they can reform enough to actually survive. And then we have this resurgence of nationalist parties. Countries like Hungary have elected not once, but twice a nationalist leader who has called into question some of the events of the Holocaust, who has used some of the language that Hitler used as well when referring to non-Hungarians, specifically the Roma. And then we see that in Germany, of all places. They have the Alternative for Deutschland. This is a neo-Nazi party that has won 13% of the German vote in their last elections. So the whole idea of transnationalism was to prevent these nationalists from gaining power again, and now we're dealing with them all over again. And then the migrant crisis. Europe has what's known as the Schengen zone or the Schengen area. It was created in 1995. On paper, it's a really great idea. If you've ever traveled and had to go through customs, it can take forever. It can take hours if the lines are really long. And so when the Schengen area was created, what ended up happening was that if you enter in France, you can enter any of the European Union nations and not have to stop and get your passport checked at every single border. That shortened lines, not just for people coming to visit, but it shortened lines in trucks who are coming in with food from different countries. It shortened lines for workers going back and forth between different countries. It also allowed for this free movement of people. And then, of course, you have Brexit. No one knows what Brexit's going to do. It should not show up on your test, to be honest with you, because it is well past 2009. But it is something that is a threat to this whole idea of European integration, because it is this concept that Britain should go it alone. And so that's kind of where you can bring in Margaret Thatcher, the original topic for tonight. She also questioned this idea of European integration because she felt that it was a threat to the economy of the United Kingdom. At that time, we have a resurgence of conservative politics. A slimming down, if you'd like, of a, I forgot the term now because, you know, why not? But basically any kind of policy that would help people, whether it's Social Security, healthcare, unemployment insurance, any kinds of programs like that. A lot of countries, not just the United States and certainly not just the United Kingdom, were questioning if they should be as big as they are. And so Margaret Thatcher also questioned if being in what was then called the European Community was preventing Great Britain from allowing themselves to slim down these programs. So we're at a point now where we really don't know what's going to happen. Will it last? We don't know. It kind of depends on Britain at the moment. They were supposed to have left the European Union last month. That didn't happen. They asked for an extension. They were given an extension until April 12th. Obviously, April 12th has come and gone, and they still have not left. They had to ask for another extension. Europe has to decide, are they going to give them an extension beyond June? Are they going to give them an extension beyond May? Or even, as somebody pointed out, it seems October 31st. Because there are European Parliament elections coming up in May. And if United Kingdom is part of the European Union, they are still going to have a vote for the European Union, which seems antithetical to this whole idea of leaving the European Union. So if we kind of go through a very quick timeline, you guys can download this PowerPoint after the broadcast for the timeline, so don't think you have to write it all down. We see that the end of World War II kind of speeds up this idea of European integration, starting in 1949. Throughout the 50s, we have some small steps to European integration, with the Treaty of Rome creating that economic zone. And then you have the first European Commission to kind of create this idea of how are we going to integrate. It's already been agreed to on October, is what Florian says. I've heard that floated around, but from my understanding, it has not yet been voted on by the leaders of Europe for that official date. And my computer's frozen again. There we go. In the 1960s, the United Kingdom twice tried to join the European community, and twice they were blocked by, of all people, France. And now the French don't want them to leave. So again, irony. We see the beginnings of the Troubles. Not much happens, but the 70s and the 80s, we see a lot of movement in this integration, okay? The beginnings of this idea of the Euro and the Eurozone, more countries joining the European communities. And then eventually by the mid 80s, we have that, okay, we are going to be one country or one entity. And the development of what we now call the EU kind of flourished. In the 1990s, that's when the EU actually comes around. A lot of people misunderstand that. They think the EU's been around since the 50s. Officially, the European Union is from 1992. But with that, we see the creation of the Schengen zone and the European Central Bank that institutional part of creating the bulwark against economic collapse in countries in 2008. And then we're into today in the 2000s. The Charter of Fundamental Rights, rights as a European, as a human, any European citizen living within the European Union can sue against a nation in the European Court of High Commission for Human Rights. And quite often what's happened is when they decide on a law, that law has to actually be implemented or changed in all members of the EU. At the current moment, we're waiting to see what happens with the United Kingdom. And so we don't know what's going to happen. But this is kind of a really rough, big overview of European integration. I didn't want to take the entire hour to talk about it. I wanted to open it up to questions from you guys and see what we've got here, because I see that we've got a lot of questions here. So go ahead. If you have questions, put them in the Ask a Question box so that I know what they are. The chat on the right can sometimes get a little bit crazy, and we'll just go down from there. So we will start with the first one from Emily. What should we know about Thatcher's government? So Thatcher's government, really what you need to know is that she was the first female prime minister of the United Kingdom. She was a conservative and probably one of the biggest allies of American President Ronald Reagan. She tried to pare back a lot of the social programs that the United Kingdom has, including insurance and unemployment benefits and unions. For a long time, there was a big battle between Thatcher and the steel and the iron unions of the UK, who eventually lost. She won. And so she was able to bring it up and take away some of their pay, some of their benefits. I would say that's the biggest thing to know about her government, is that she won against the unions, and she was an ally to Ronald Reagan. So what is consumerism and how does it become relevant after World War II? So consumerism is this idea that we no longer create products for survival or to make life easier. Now we're making products just because we want them, okay? Take your phone, for example, right? I've got a Google Pixel phone, right? Love my phone, but do I really need my phone to be able to function? And the answer to that, most of you are probably going to say, is yes, because, you know, you're teenagers. But in reality, prior to when I was in high school, we functioned great without phones. We don't need them, but we want to consume them. We want to have them because we think we need them. So that's what consumerism is. It's this idea of creating products that you think you need, like the phone, when in reality, maybe not so much. After World War II, the reason it becomes relevant is because of money, right? We are coming out of the Great Depression. We're coming out of people who are going, I don't have not just money to pay my bills, I don't have money to survive. Okay, there are people and instances we know of parents selling their children, not because they wanted to, but because they wanted to be able to afford having something and somebody could take care of them. Post-World War II, now we've got money. What do we do with the money? Well, we're going to spend it. We're going to spend it on everything we can because our parents or our grandparents couldn't. They just had to survive. And so after World War II, this consumerist ideology kind of takes hold. And we really see it today in some of the things that people buy. I mean, $1,000 phones. Who needs a $1,000 phone when a $100 phone does the exact same thing? Marshall Plan. What is the Marshall Plan's effect on Europe? So the Marshall Plan was an American plan, actually. It was not a European plan. And it was a plan promoted by Marshall, who was, and I might be wrong here because I don't do American history, I think he was the Central Command of Europe. And his plan was basically, let's throw cash at European nations. If you're a European nation that fought with us against the Nazis, we're going to help you. If you take our cash, though, you have to have capitalism. And you have to have some sort of policy involved that will prevent communism and totalitarianism from spreading. So the Marshall Plan, if I can go back to what I have here, you can kind of see in this graph what the Marshall Plan did. Different countries got different amounts. The UK got the most. There are our closest ally at the time in Europe. You could make the argument Germany is now. But notice that West Germany gets a really large chunk, 11%, as does the Italians. Those were technically our enemies during World War II. But we're giving them money because not only do we want to prevent communism, we're also trying to prevent another fascist dictatorship from taking over. And so the Marshall Plan's idea here is cash will prevent it, not an institutional change necessarily. And that could be what a lot of people would say is its primary weakness, is we're not going to the root of why fascism and communism are taking over. We're just throwing cash at it and going, all right, take it and prevent it from happening again. But we're not going to do anything else to help you. What is Thatcherism and how is it significant? I answered that, but just to make sure that you got it, basically, Thatcherism is conservative politics, a reducing of spending on social programs and a reducing of the power of unions. What ways can the Eurozone be compared to Zollverein? Very good question, Ben. So Zollverein was a similar idea in Central Europe, right? It was a free trade zone to kind of unite some of the German princely states. And Zollverein was a way to prevent war. Didn't work because obviously we had much more war after that, World War I, World War II, Franco-Prussian War, etc. But The Eurozone, what it does, unlike the Zollverein, is the Eurozone isn't just economics. Okay, its primary goal is economics, but it also is human rights, politics. It's standardization of things like weights and measures. Okay, the world did not have that prior to the 1970s. Okay, the United States is still only one of 3 now that don't use this standardization. The Eurozone is what brought that about. That's why you can go from France to Germany to Poland to Hungary, not speak any of their languages, but 10 centimeters is 10 centimeters is 10 centimeters. With the added benefit of the euro as a currency, you know what you're spending in every country. I went to Central Europe a couple of years ago, and when I was in Germany and Austria, I knew what the euro was because they used it in both countries. But while I was in the Czech Republic and Hungary, I had to constantly in my head be changing how much I was spending, because those 2 countries, while they're in the Eurozone, have not yet met the economic threshold to switch to the euro. And so in Czech Republic and Hungary, they still use their own currency. Czech Republic uses the kroner and the Hungarians use the forint. And if memory serves, it was like 235 Czech kronars to $1 and like 400 and something forint to the American dollar. That's a lot to kind of keep in track in your head, right? And if you're going from country to country to country and they all have different currencies, that can be really hard for businesses. And when you're talking billions of dollars, like Apple, for example, every time they go to a new country that has a new currency, they're paying money to change into whatever currency that is, which means they're losing money. So that's kind of how I would say the Eurozone compares to Zollverein, how it's kind of better than Zollverein. But you could also make an argument that it has one of the same problems as the Zollverein, which is it's not uniting the people. It's only uniting the politics and the economics. So we're going to say we're done with Thatcherism. All right, so we have a question here on DBQ. I often have trouble finishing my DBQs on time because my arguments and paragraphs are really lengthy. Any tips? Very good question. First thing I'm going to say is it's not about length, okay? It's never about length in any of the essays. It's about answering the question. So when you are writing your DBQ, I'm going to tell you, you need to watch, okay? You need to be timing yourself. Don't rely on a clock in the room. Have a regular analog watch on you. And you have 60 minutes is what I would say, all right? You do have an hour and 40 minutes total to divide how you want. I tell my students 60 minutes. 15 of those minutes should be spent analyzing those documents. When I say analyzing the documents, you need to be summarizing them and doing your HIP of those documents. So HIP, other teachers might have a different acronym. We call that historical context, intended audience, point of view, and purpose. Pick one. You don't have to do all 4 for all the documents. You only need to do 1 per document. When you're writing your DBQ, you should allow that natural grouping to happen, even though we don't have grouping as a point anymore. Based off your thesis documents, group each other. So if your thesis is talking about the Eurozone, politics of the Eurozone, and these social aspects of the Eurozone, you should put your documents in those same groups. From there, make sure you're just hitting the points. Okay, these are not meant to be final essays. As we read them, when we're scoring them in June, we know we're scoring rough drafts. So don't try to think that you have to give us everything you know. Just give us what is going to strengthen your argument. And from there, you should be able to kind of pare down how much you're writing. Don't give us 12 pages. We don't need 12 pages of a DBQ. Don't write a page either, I would say. Even though it's not about length, you want to make sure that you are explaining yourself in a manner that nobody in the room, when we are scoring them, is going, what is this kid trying to say? If he had just given me a little bit more, I'd be great. So in this case, I would say that's where you can kind of help with your length. Be as concise and clear as possible. Hopefully that answers you. If not, ask me again. And we'll go from there. So Next question, how has the EU affected the former region of Yugoslavia since Slovenia and Croatia are part of the EU, while the other 6 republics aren't? That is a really good question, Ben. So that's a big issue actually with the other 6 republics. One of them I would say is probably about to be part of the EU. I'm not any kind of specialist or expert in this regard, but, and that would be what is now called Northern Macedonia. It used to be called Macedonia, but the nation of Greece had a very big issue with that, as they claimed Macedonia as part of their nation due to ancient historical records. And the Macedonians were going, nope, we're Macedonian, even though we don't speak any Greek or have any relation to Philip of Macedon or Alexander the Great. So for 20 years or so, give or take, there was an agreement that the only way what was then known as the FYR Macedonia, or former Yugoslav Republic, would be able to join any kind of EU agreement is if that issue between the 2 countries was solved. And I think it was in January, maybe February, so don't quote me on it. They finally solved it. Not everybody's happy. Most everybody's angry. Macedonia will no longer be called Macedonia. It will now be called Northern Macedonia. Greece isn't happy about it, but they'll accept it. Okay. Clearing that hurdle, Northern Macedonia should be able to join the EU. The other 5, that's an issue. Montenegro, not so much, but when we talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia and Kosovo especially, those 3, there's a lot of things that are preventing them from joining. Chief amongst them, Serbia doesn't recognize Kosovo as being a separate country or Bosnia as being a separate country. Bosnia has a power sharing agreement, and it's not a stable agreement, all right? You've got one person who's a Bosnian Muslim, one person who's a Bosnian Croat, which means their religion is Catholic, and you have one person who's a Bosnian Serb, which means their religion is Eastern Orthodoxy. The 3 of them don't generally get along, and so because of that, a lot of times there's a lot of breakdown in the governments. So I would say that it's the EU affecting the region and not so much as the other way around, because they've kind of prevented that European integration, right? They're preventing this idea of transnationalism, because the Serbs still are very proud of being Serbs, not Europeans. And Bosnians, rightfully so, are very proud of being Bosnian. And they want the Serbs to recognize that Bosnia has a right to be Bosnian. So it's a very complex answer. There is no right or wrong answer in this case. I would say that the EU has affected that area in the sense that it's kind of helped to settle some of the issues. But on the other hand, it's exacerbated issues at the same time. It just depends on who you're looking at it from. That's probably as clear as mud. But I hope it helps. We've already done the Marshall Plan, so I'm gonna move along from it. You can just go back and rewatch, and then again, you can download the slides after the end of the presentation. What were the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic? Okay, that's a big question. So the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic, where do we begin? It wasn't really democratic. It had its part in the constitution of the Weimar Republic that said that the government could shut down all form of social and civic liberties in order to protect the republic. That's what Hitler used when he took power to prevent any kind of power grab from him. Other weaknesses included that it was never really propped up by the West. France was royally mad at the Germans because of World War I. They were not going to help. The English, the same thing. I mean, the royal family of the United Kingdom changed their name because they didn't want to be German. And so the only people who kind of help is us, the United States. In some regards, yeah, I guess we do. We give them loans to help them pay the reparations to France and England. But on the other hand, they in turn have to pay us those loans back with interest. So an example of why this was so bad, Germany did not finish paying off World War I until 2015. Okay, World War II, I don't even want to think about how long it's going to take them to pay that off. So one of the differences I would say between the Marshall Plan and the Weimar Republic is that rather than forcing reparations to be paid off like that immediately, we're giving Germany help to rebuild its economy. We gave Germany help to rebuild its infrastructure and to kind of settle from the upheaval of that change in government and change in economic production. The Weimar Republic never had that. They never got that help. They were basically told, okay, good luck. You're on your own. We're not going to help you. And that led to hyperinflation. I would say that's the biggest weakness, is hyperinflation. Because there's this old kind of circular argument, you could say. Does instability lead to war, or does war lead to instability? And in the case of the Weimar Republic, it's both, right? Because the war, World War I, led to the instability of the German Empire, which led to the Weimar Republic. But the inability of the Weimar Republic to create economic growth led to the instability, which gave to the rise of Hitler. So hopefully that helps. How was the European Union created, and what? Oh, that just disappeared from me. Can you explain a little bit about the neoliberal movement? I can try. I'm not going to lie. Neoliberalism is not my forte. I did not study that in college. I studied Middle Eastern politics. So neoliberalism is a term oftentimes coined with the 90s, especially when we talk about someone like, let's say, President Clinton or Hillary Clinton. Oftentimes people will talk about neoliberals as being conservatives on economic policy, but liberal on more social policy. They're more likely to pursue strict capitalism in the old Adam Smith sense, with the invisible hand moving things, less government regulation. But on the other hand, they're also going to be very, very involved in international relations. That's why the United States got involved, right? In the Yugoslav wars, we got involved, we bombed, we did an air campaign during Kosovo instead of allowing another massacre to happen. Neoliberalism kind of got a bad rap due to the 90s, actually, because there was that dichotomy here of, we want capitalism, but we're going to get involved in everything. When capitalism says, no, let's not get involved. That's a very, very, very broad understanding of neoliberalism. It's not very good, probably, if you ask me, but that's what I can give you. So I hope it helps. I would suggest you go and look up some articles from the 90s about the Yugoslav wars and how neoliberalism affected that. So hopefully that helps, Maria. Can you go over the Solidarity movement and the revolution of Czechoslovakia? Sure, not a problem. So Solidarity, that was a movement started by the Lech brothers in Poland in 1980. The reason why it's so important is because it's the first time that we don't see a brutal crushing by the Soviets of this movement. There's a lot of reasons some people think it could happen. I personally would say that it's because there were just too many people. It was millions of people, and it wasn't just in Warsaw, it was throughout the entire country. When we look back in like the Czechoslovakian uprising in the 60s or the Hungarian uprising in the 50s, that was really only in the capitals. It wasn't throughout the entire country. And so that's what allowed the Soviets to crush it. Solidarity, they couldn't crush it. They kind of had to figure a way to work with it. That doesn't mean that it brought communism crashing down. I mean, communism survived for another 11 years in parts of Europe. So Solidarity, what it did, though, is it showed those people that wanted to have a democratic institution in a communist nation that it's possible. And you just got to get enough people to do it. With Czechoslovakia, that is a revolution that many countries should probably follow if we ever have one again, God forbid, right? Because it was peaceful. There was no gunfiring, there was no bloodshed. It wasn't easy, don't get me wrong, all right? Separating two countries is never gonna be easy. But overall, what was known as the Velvet Revolution, it meant that these people, both Czechs and Slovaks, said, we don't hate each other, we don't want to kill each other, but we want to be our own countries, okay? We have our own identities, our own languages, our own histories. And so that separation there, it was a hope that if the Yugoslavia broke up, they would follow suit, but sadly, they didn't. So hopefully that helps you there as well. How was the European Union created and what caused it? Also, how does this represent the historical concept of CCOT? All right, Rory, you really want me to go deep into this, don't you? So here's what I can tell you. The European Union was created through a lot of different treaties and agreements between European countries. There was no one, boom, European Union is there. It was a lot of work on European nations' parts. It started with this idea in the 1940s with the European Community coming out in 1949. It grew from there into the European Economic Zone and the European Agency and the European Commission. And every decade after that, there was more and more integration with more commonality and easier things before the European Union decided to tackle the two big things, politics and economics. That wasn't until the 80s and the early 90s. And that integration wasn't perfect, okay? The United Kingdom fought really hard to not be forced into adopting the euro, which is why they still have what's known as the pound sterling. Because of that, they are part of the European Union, but not necessarily a part of the entire European Economic Zone, right? Because they don't have the euro, they don't have the same currency. On the flip side, though, there is still this integration with the European Central Bank. Okay, the European Central Bank sets the standards for how much the valuation of the euro is, how much loans will be set at interest rates, things like that. So I can't really say there's one cause to it. I would say you could say there's a lot of causes. You could make the argument Napoleon caused the European Union. Because of his destruction of Europe, Europeans are like, no, we don't want this anymore. Let's not fight. It's a stretch, but you know, there's people who are going to try. With CCOT, how is it changing continuity? I would say that it's continuity in the sense that you do still have the separation of countries in Europe. You don't have just the United States of Europe, like Churchill said you would. You have France, you have Germany, you have Ireland, you have Poland. If anything wants to change in the EU, they've got to vote on it. And in some countries like Ireland or Poland, if the people do not agree with that change, they will not adopt it. And if Ireland doesn't adopt it, nobody adopts it. Or if Poland doesn't adopt it, nobody adopts it. So that's kind of the continuity there, is that you do have this still separation of these countries. The change, I would say, is that we've seen a lot of diplomatic issues being solved through the European Union. Rather than going to war, we have countries suing each other through the European Court of Justice and accepting the judgments from them and going, okay, I don't like it, but fine, I'll follow it. You also have this idea of transnationalism, right? That's a big change. No longer do people really talk about being British and French and German. They're still proud of that history, but they say, I'm European and I'm proud to be European, because that means that we won't go to war with each other again. We have that common history of being European, which is bigger than the national history. So I hope that helps. Again, very broad, very, very short, but hopefully. What is the latest year that the AP exam covers? Roughly speaking, it'll go to about 2008, 2009. That doesn't mean that you can't use things from current time with in your writing. What I would say is with something like Brexit, we don't know the effects of Brexit yet. So since we don't know the effects, don't really use it as a piece of proof or of evidence, more as like an anecdote. And that might be a better way to do that. Helps. And then I just got a really big I have trouble finishing my MCQ because of time issues. Any tips? So Jillian says process of elimination because it's easier to find wrong answers. That's a great tip. Time yourself and try to figure out how much time it takes for you to do 5 or 10 questions. Agree. Recognize when you have done all you can, and then make your best guess before moving on. Really good points, Jillian. I agree with you. The other thing I would have add to it, if you are reading everything, you need to stop. I would tell you, and I think I have told you this because I know who you are, read the question, read the title of the document the question goes to, and read the source. From there, if you still can't figure it out, then read the source. because you are on a time crunch, okay? 55 questions in 55 minutes. You've got 1 minute, 60 seconds to do all of that for every question. And I don't know about you, I can't read that fast. So by kind of doing those tricks of process elimination, reading the question first and seeing, okay, here's the question. It's asking me about European integration. The document is the Treaty of Rome, and it was passed in 1957. Okay, what do I know what's going on in that time frame? Activate the knowledge you already have and see if you can answer the question from there. If you can't, then go to the document and read the document. So I hope that helps you, Gigi. You can always ask me in class again. I'm sure you will. So don't worry, I'll help you if you just remind me. Hi, Tom. Sorry, not Tom. Please respond to this question. When will you put week 6 through 10 study guides on your website right here? Sorry, not Tom. Can't answer that question. Hopefully somebody, it looks like Kyle answered it for you. You can ask him next week. He'll be back next week doing a review for period 1. Maybe he can tell you then. Sorry, Rory. So, like Ireland, did Yugoslavian nationalistic movements involve terrorism? That's a hard question to answer. You're getting into politics there. I would say you could probably go with yes, especially when you look at the massacre at Srebrenica. Srebrenica was a small town in Bosnia. The Serbian army rounded up all of the men and boys aged 15 to 60, if memory serves me correct, took them out to a field and killed them all. That's terrorism. That's by very definition of terror, to instill fear to prevent you from wanting to fight back. That massacre, it was a defining moment of the war because no one thought that would happen again. We hadn't seen that since World War II with the Holocaust. And so we didn't expect to see it again. Another aspect I would say that is terrorism would be the siege of Sarajevo. That is the capital of Bosnia. It was the shining jewel, actually, of Yugoslavia. It hosted the Olympics in the 1980s. But the city was put under siege for over a year. I think it was a year and a half by the Serbian army. And what would happen is people would be walking down the street and then you'd hear a bullet come by and somebody would just drop dead in the street because a sniper somewhere in a hill saw you and decided to take a shot at you. So I would say, yes, that's terrorism as well. But again, that's very political. It's not a black and white answer. It was not just the Serbs that did this. So don't think that it was all of the Bosnians are innocent or the Croats are innocent. We know of other instances where the Serbs were targeted. So hopefully that helps you. I would say Ireland, the biggest difference between Ireland and Yugoslavia is Ireland was not an actual war, okay? Yugoslavia was a war. Ireland was more of an insurgency, an intractable position that neither side was able to win, so they had no choice but to come to an agreement. How has the CIS formed after the collapse of the USSR? You're gonna have to remind me what CIS stands for. I'm sorry, it is 8:53 in the evening. I don't remember what that means. So if you can type it out on the right, that'd be great. Any tips for getting the last 2 points on the DBQ, outside knowledge and complexity point? Great question to Lal. So easy way to get outside knowledge. Every single time you do HIP, historical context, intended audience, point of view, or purpose, automatically start writing a piece of knowledge not included in the document. So here's an example. If you have a document that is the Marshall Plan, right? And it's that chart that you have on your screen. And you want to bring in a piece of outside knowledge. What you could bring in is the Molotov Plan, right? Talk about how the Molotov Plan was the Soviets' example and kind of check to that. Automatically get yourself into the habit of doing that. Because if you put 7 pieces of outside knowledge in there, hopefully one of them is going to be right. And if you have more than one of them, that's even going to be better, and that will take you to that complexity point. In reality, the complexity point is the unicorn. Okay, very rarely did we see it last year. We're still kind of trying to figure out what exactly we want to see with complexity. I would say that if not just DBQ, but LEQ and DBQ, if it's asking you to do, tell the causation of something, tell the similarities of something, make sure you do both sides of the argument. So do causes and effects, do similarities and differences, changes and continuities. and try to integrate into your argument a counter argument. So your thesis, one of a really good way to set up complexity is to say, although X, Y because of Z. So although European integration has faltered in 2016, European integration was successful due to the Schengen zone being passed by the European community. So your complexity is going to come in your explanation of 2016, right? But the vast majority of your essay is going to be about that why, the Schengen zone and success, okay? Hopefully that helps you. If not, maybe you can go watch one of Tom's videos and he goes over this, but he says the same thing. It is the unicorn point, so good luck. Commonwealth of Independent States, Russia's organization of balance to the EU. Ben, I'm going to be honest with you, Russia is not my forte. Again, I study the Middle East, so my guess would be, how has it formed? It's basically formed with states that have those ties still to Russia. We know that some of those, like Ukraine, Bulgaria, Poland, they've joined the European Union or want to join the European Union, but right now they might not be able to. Poland has, but the other two I don't think have. Bulgaria has, I lied. So they might have no choice but to join the CIS. So again, this is not my forte, so please do not quote me on this. I would say ask your teacher, they probably know more than I do, unless, Ben, you're my kid. So any tips on getting that final complexity point? Florin, hopefully I answered that question earlier with Talal's question. Again, make sure you're giving both sides of the argument, similarities, differences, causes, effects, etc. And work in that complex thesis statement, although X, Y because of Z. That last paragraph is where you'll bring in that X and you'll talk about the other side of the argument. What are your tips for going about the LEQ, Andrea? So that depends on what you mean by going about the LEQ. If you mean about writing it, you've got 40 minutes. Spend 5 minutes planning it, 35 minutes writing it. It is probably going to be your roughest essay, and that's okay. Don't think that we expect you to be writing a Nobel Prize winning paper. We don't, right? Again, you know the rubric, it gives you the rubric, go for the points on the rubric, okay? We don't look for flowery language. We're not grading you on grammar and syntax or structure or anything. As long as we can understand what you're saying, we're gonna look for ways that we can see what you're saying and if it's right or wrong, okay? Don't stress about the LEQ. You need to write the LEQ, make an attempt at the LEQ. I would put more effort into your DBQ though. Kind of unrelated to integration, but how much emphasis is placed on the different movements of art? Very good question, and that just depends year on year. I think last year there might have been a couple of questions on art. The year before that, I know there were quite a few questions on art, so that will change year to year. Knowing the different movements, the general meanings of the movements, who was involved, you should be good. Can I stay for another hour? No, I have not yet eaten dinner, and I need to go eat dinner, and then I need to go to bed because I still have to teach tomorrow. Sorry. And then last, we'll end it here. Could you explain the different ways of feminism, the time periods, goals, effects, and et cetera? Whoa, Kyle, you really wanted to go out with a bang. All right, so feminism, not different waves, because I'm not sure what you mean unless you're talking like first wave and second wave, which is in the 1900s. But we can talk about the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. Feminism was the suffrage movement. Suffrage movement specifically, if we're talking in Europe, for upper class suffrage. So the wealthy and the nobility. From there, post-World War I, we see that change. It's no longer just suffrage, it's now work. Women were working in the factories. They don't want to stop working. They want to keep making money because it gives independence. After World War II, we see that suffrage and work move on to equality now, equality with running for office, equality with leading a nation, into the current time period, where we're looking at, the Me Too movement. I would not put that in your essay, but that's another wave of feminism where we're no longer, it's not just about integration now. Now it's about full equality and respect. It's a very quick answer, guys, but it is almost the end of this broadcast. I hope this helped you guys. Tom will be back next week if I did not help you. Appreciate y'all coming. Have a good evening, get some sleep, and if you are my kid, I will see you guys tomorrow.